Good afternoon. The first item of business is consideration of business motion 7588 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a revision to the business programme for today. Any member who wishes to speak against the motion should press the request to speak button now. And I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion 7588.
Formally moved.
No members asked to speak against the motion. Therefore, I now put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion number 7588 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. The next item of business is general questions. Question number 1, Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when Transport Scotland received ACOM's initial recommendations on public transport infrastructure options relating to Glasgow Airport.
Minister Keith Brown.
Transport Scotland has been working with the group led by Glasgow Airport on future surface access to the airport since 2010. That client group received the completed initial appraisal report on the Glasgow Airport Strategic Transport Network Study from ACOM on the 29th of August 2013. This includes a range of options across all modes of transport which are recommended to be taken forward to detailed appraisal.
Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Minister, for that answer. I think the delay in publishing that report, as it was reported, the initial findings were given to Transport Scotland as early as April, alongside news that the last plot of Garrow land was sold back to the original owner for £50,000, almost £800,000 less than they were originally paid, highlights the folly of this government's scorched earth policy on Garrow. Can the Minister tell me what was the cumulative loss made by the government in disposing of land purchased for the Garrow project?
Minister.
Can I first of all welcome Mark Griffin to his new position and also congratulate him on his engagement over the summer-time. Can I also say to him, though, that his question has a fundamental flaw. The land that was purchased, which he mentioned, was purchased by the SPT, Strathclyde Passenger Transport Authority, and not by the government initially, although they subsequently bought it from SPT. So perhaps you might want to address some questions to SPT about that. Can I also say that we have just had the initial appraisal report. There is no question that the government is delaying this. Of course, the first time it came to the notice of the client partners, and the lead partner is Glasgow Airport, not the Scottish Government, the other two partners being Glasgow Council and Renfrewshire Council. It was those two councils which asked for substantial changes to those initial recommendations, and of course those had to be worked through. So there is no question of any delay. There have been substantial benefits from the Paisley Corridor improvements to the area in question, paid for by the Government, and of course the cancellation of the Garrow project saved £176 million. Of course there's been a cost because land was purchased at the height of the market and then sold during a recession. There's no question of that. However, if you compare that to the same reports which he talks about refer to the £2 billion additional cost for the aircraft carriers which the Labour Party signed up to, it seems a much smaller fee in the first place, and we took the right decision on Garrow then, and our position remains the same. This Government will not be funding a heavy rail link to Glasgow Airport, albeit that the report recommends it may be investigated. If a private sector bid comes forward, then of course the Government would look at that.
James Kelly.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Brief question to the Minister. What Government Minister authorised the sale of the land referred to in the Herald report this morning?
Minister.
The sale of the land had to proceed from the decision that was taken by Parliament in the budget paper, which was agreed. It follows under the Critchell Down rules that the Government, as any other public authority, is obliged to sell that land. There is no option but to do that. So we did the right thing. If he thinks it's the wrong thing, perhaps he should talk to his colleagues at Westminster and have the primary legislation changed.
Question number 2, John Finney.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it plans to review its arrangements for dealing with civil emergencies.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny McCaskill.
Recent events and emergencies ranging from the London Olympics to abnormally severe weather have shown that the Scottish Government's arrangements for dealing with emergencies remain sound. We continue, however, to keep them under constant review and to refine our arrangements when lessons are identified either during exercises or in real emergencies.
John Finney.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. In response to a recent parliamentary question I lodged asking the Scottish Government whether it maintains details of companies based in Scotland that are involved in research into development or manufacture of armaments, I was told the Scottish Government does not maintain a central list of companies. How, if that is the case, can the Cabinet Secretary assure the public that all contingencies to cover civil emergencies are in place?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think the civil emergencies are go across a broad spectrum. The Government doesn't maintain a central list of companies based in Scotland involved in research into development or manufacture of armaments. Similarly, enterprise agencies don't do so either. Clearly, the Government has a view, as does the SNP, as Mr Finney knows, about the sale of armaments. Equally, some of these matters can become quite complex. There are matters that are developed through the military that do have civilian and indeed police authority matters. It's not simply the internet, but for example, ANPR started out as a military matter, but is now used significantly and, I think to a great extent and very well received by the police. So I think these matters are a matter of balance. There are political matters, especially in areas of conflict, where we would not support armament sales. Equally, there are matters developed, whether the internet or ANPR, by perhaps the military, where there clearly is significant benefit both for society but especially for civilian policing.
Baillie MacLeod.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that Dumfries and Galloway Council's application for support under the Bellwyn scheme to help meet the costs of the severe weather in March as an emergency was ruled ineligible under the rules, and in that instance both the threshold for assistance and the criteria were against the Council, which nevertheless accumulated considerable costs. So will the Cabinet Secretary look at what may still be done to support Dumfries and Galloway by other methods?
Cabinet Secretary.
Obviously, my colleague, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, will be happy to do that, I have no doubt. The Scottish Government did activate the Bellwyn scheme following the severe snowstorms in March. The claim submitted by Dumfries and Galloway Council was fully considered, but was ineligible as it fell within the 0.2% threshold that local authorities maintain within their annual budgets to deal with unforeseen emergencies. And I do appreciate that the extreme weather had a financial impact in the area and additional support is being provided. For example, last week, the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs announced that over £730,000 in fallen stock payments have now reached the bank accounts of over 4,000 farmers across Scotland. More than half of these funds have gone to farmers in South West Scotland. We would be happy to consider further assistance through existing available funding streams if the criteria for an application are met.
Number 3, George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what statutory duties local education authorities must consider when reorganising school estates.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Russell.
Presiding Officer, under the Education Scotland Act 1980, education authorities have a duty to ensure the adequate and efficient provision of school education in their area. The Schools Consultation Scotland Act 2010 sets out the consultation process that an education authority must follow, and I stress must follow, when proposing changes to its school estate, such as school closures, relocations and changes to catchment areas.
George Adam.
Does the Cabinet Secretary share my concern at the rationalisation of school estates throughout Renfrewshire and the Labour-led Council's strategy to avoid statutory requirements? Is this not a prime example of how Labour are determined to make the closure of schools a much easier process?
Cabinet Secretary.
I understand that Renfrewshire Council plans to carry out a preliminary consultation on a range of options for reorganisation of its school estate. I'd encourage your constituents to respond to this consultation so that their views can be taken into account. There must be no doubt, however, that should a council decide to take forward a relevant proposal under the Schools Consultation Act 2010, for example, to close or relocate a school, there is a clear statutory consultation process which it must follow. I expect every council to follow the law and engage in an open and honest discussion with the community it serves about any school closure proposal. I also expect educational benefit for the affected children to be central to any and every school closure proposal.
Question number 4, John Penland.
Met NHS Lanarkshire to discuss hospital standardised mortality rates.
Minister Michael Matheson.
I chaired NHS Lanarkshire's annual review in Hamilton on the 29th of August when the recently published hospital standardised mortality rates were discussed. Both ministers and officials regularly engage with all NHS boards, including NHS Lanarkshire, to discuss matters of importance to local people.
John Penland.
Can I thank the Minister for that response? But however, when you're looking at the mortality ratios, there is a marked inconsistency of approach. On one hand, Wishaw is now being investigated after being 10% higher than expected last quarter, but was average or below for the previous 3. On the other hand, Monklands was high throughout the year, growing from 9% to over 38%, 80 unexpected deaths without any investigation until now. So why did it take so long for the alarm bells to ring at Monklands? And should the Minister now be considering an independent inquiry into Lanarkshire NHS as a whole?
Minister.
Well, I think it's important to recognise that there has been variation across the 3 hospital sites within NHS Lanarkshire around HSMR, and that's been picked up over several quarters. What NHS Lanarkshire have been doing is reviewing their processes and practices to see what they have to do in order to address that issue during that particular time, and they brought forward a programme of work that they intended to take forward in order to address those specific issues. However, in light of the most recent data, Professor Jason Leach within the Scottish Government felt it prudent to appoint a specialist team to go in and undertake an independent review of the progress that's been made within NHS Lanarkshire, and we expect to receive that report from Healthcare Improvement Scotland by the end of this year. At that point, we'll be able to identify what these factors are that has resulted in a higher level within the 3 sites within NHS Lanarkshire overall. It's likely to be a number of different issues, but it's important we take the right time in order to investigate this issue thoroughly and then take the appropriate measures as necessary in order to address the issue.
Question number 5, Rob Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask Scottish Government what progress has made on distributing the funds arising from reforms to the Common Agriculture Policy.
Cabinet Secretary Richard Blockhead.
During the recent European negotiations, we were profoundly disappointed that the UK Government did not attempt to negotiate better budget allocations for Scotland, given our very poor share of CAP funds. However, we are, of course, currently negotiating Scotland's share of the UK's CAP budget with the UK Government and other devolved administrations. We do, of course, hope that the UK Government will finally recognise our case and agree to give Scotland's farmers a much fairer allocation of available funds.
Rob Gibson.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Can he explain how much support will be lost to Scotland's rural economy in the new CAP by the UK Government's failure to press the case for Scotland's high-quality produce from areas of natural constraint like my constituency?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, it's a very good point. Scotland went into these negotiations with the 4th lowest level in Europe of direct payments for farmers and the lowest level of payments in Europe for wider rural development measures. Under the funding formula adopted during the recent negotiations, no member state will receive less than the average of €196 per hectare by 2019. If Scotland had been a member state, that would have delivered an uplift of around €1 billion to Scotland, a 30% increase or thereabouts by 2019-2020. As it is, of course, we're part of the UK, therefore the UK will qualify for perhaps up to €60 million by 2020 for that year, rising from €10 million in 2014. That money, at the very least, should come to Scotland because the UK only qualifies because of Scotland, and therefore it belongs to Scotland and Scotland's rural communities. And that's what we will be demanding, but of course it's nothing in comparison to the €1 billion we'll be losing out on because we're not a member state in their own right in Europe.
Question number 6, Jamie Hepburn.
To ask the Scottish Government what impact the under-occupancy charge, which is commonly known as the bedroom tax, is having on communities in Scotland.
Minister Margaret Burgess.
The Department for Work and Pensions under-occupancy charge is affecting 82,500 households in Scotland. 63,500 of these households contain an adult with a disability and 15,500 households contain children. We estimate the average reduction to be around £11 per week per household.
Jamie Hepburn.
I thank the Minister for that answer. During recess, we saw Labour-controlled North Lanarkshire Council threaten to evict a severely disabled single mum suffering the bedroom tax, and reportedly the council leader turning up to her doorstep to harangue her rather than assist her. Does the Minister agree that this conduct is shameful, as with North Lanarkshire Labour's vote on the council against SNP councillors' motion in favour of a no bedroom tax eviction policy?
Minister.
Like I'm sure everyone in the chamber, I was very concerned to read about the possible eviction of a disabled lady due to the bedroom tax. In particular, that the local authority may have made an error in classifying the tenant as under-occupying her home when she said she had a son and daughter living with her. I therefore wrote to the Chief Executive of North Lanarkshire Council and asked him to review the case. The response I received a week later could only confirm that an eviction was not pending. And I think this case highlights the dreadful effect that the bedroom tax is having on Scottish society and why this government believes it should be scrapped.
Jackie Baillie.
I am sure the Minister will be equally concerned about threatened evictions in East Ayrshire and Clackmannanshire, and I think that makes the point. So will the Minister take this opportunity to tell the Chamber whether the SNP will support my member's bill to protect all tenants across Scotland from eviction arising from the bedroom tax, something that she can do now, or will she actually make people wait to 2017?
Minister.
I think I'll say a couple of things on that, and Miss Bailey's Labour come lately proposals in this, and it's pure hypocrisy, and it's far too important. And I like a bit of political ding dong like anyone else, but this is far too important for this kind of political opportunists. And what I will say is that the Scottish Government has said consistently that we are opposed to the bedroom tax. We encouraged our SNP councils 6 months ago to carry out no evictions. But I would want to say something in all of this, that this is about real people we are talking about out there. And I want to say something quite important and something that we shouldn't be having people frightened out there. To date, there have been no evictions in Scotland because of the bedroom tax, and we will continue to talk to councils, we will continue to work with stakeholders, and we will continue to look at every proposal possible that is constructive, that can mitigate against the bedroom tax. But certainly the hypocrisy of Labour at this stage is absolutely almost overwhelmingly unbelievable. So I would say we're consistent in the bedroom tax. Labour have not been consistent in the bedroom tax. And I'll say to the people of Scotland, we continue to work with stakeholders who are genuinely concerned about the impact it's having on real people in all of our communities. And we will continue to do that until we, I guess, vote in the referendum. But we will ensure until then that we will protect the people of Scotland from the UK Government and the Labour policies.
Question number 7, Margot MacDougall.
To ask the Scottish Government how it supports GP practices.
Minister Michael Matheson.
The more Scottish GP contract in Scotland will bring real benefits for patients while reducing bureaucracy and enable GPs to spend more time with their patients. General practice is at the heart of the vision for healthcare in Scotland, ensuring that the people of Scotland are provided with better care in their homes and communities and helping them to live longer and healthier lives. The Scottish Government invests more than £757 million to deliver primary medical services last year and has increased funding to general practices this year by £8 million.
Margaret MacDougall.
I thank the Minister for that answer. The focus on reducing the pressures placed on hospitals has moved certain responsibilities, such as programmes like Detect Cancer Early, to primary care. Doctors' practices are expected to handle pre-op care. They are expected to reduce the prevalence of unscheduled care demands at A&E and have seen an increase in demand for appointments as a result of demographic shifts and because of the pressures of recent changes in benefit qualifications. What steps is this government taking to ensure primary care is properly resourced and doesn't become the poor relation of the NHS?
Minister.
Well, we've taken forward a range of different measures, including making sure that we have an increasing level of general practitioners available within Scotland in order to help to support the provision of primary healthcare services within our community. Although the member will recognise the increasing pressure that our GPs find themselves under because of the welfare reform changes have not come about as a result of the actions of this government. And I would prefer to be in a position where we could influence welfare policy to make sure that it aligns more effectively with our healthcare policy in Scotland, rather than having a system imposed upon us that does cause unintended consequences within the Scottish healthcare service. But what we will continue to do is to make sure that we support our general practitioners to be able to provide the best possible care within the primary care setting in Scotland, and that's measures that we will continue to take forward in the years to come.
We now move to First Minister's questions. Question number